camcorder broke.
Okay, we will take care of the reassessment for the test tomorrow. All right, I need to get through the remainder of this PowerPoint because it's long. It's 60 some odd slides, and we're on 23. All right, so freedom of the press. This is the next one that we're going to cover. Right, again, this is a part of the First Amendment. We've talked about media already in a previous unit, so we should understand that that's really what freedom of the press is. In all honesty, it's freedom of anything written down. That's essentially what press is ultimately going to be defined as, and therefore it shows up along with First Amendment freedom of speech. Right? I mean, it's essentially on some level written speech. Right? I do need you to understand, again, like most of our freedoms here, most of our liberties, not absolute. The United States government absolutely can prevent the press from disseminating certain types of information. Right? So a long time ago, best example I can give you of this, there was a dude named Gerardo Rivera who was embedded with a Marine Corps unit in the Middle East in like 2003. And that means that he was like living and traveling with the Marine Corps unit. Okay? It should stand to reason that it would be very unintelligent to allow him to get on like live television and be like, we are currently 1 mile southwest of like Baghdad and blah, blah, blah. Obviously they have satellite television in Iraq as well. You wouldn't want to notify the enemy of that, yes? Okay? So they absolutely could prevent him from disseminating information as a matter of national security. Right? In fact, he violated that. He was an absolute idiot. Okay? And drew a map in the sand and then like pointed the camera at the sand and was like, we're here. Right? And so they kicked him out and sent him back to the United States. All right? There are going to be some limitations or some opportunities to limit that freedom of the press as a result. Now, we talked about this as well already when we talked about like political parties and fundraising and PACs and super PACs and whatnot, right? But this is technically press, right? Hillary the movie was created in 2008, basically saying how terrible Hillary Clinton is, okay? And that is now free speech, freedom of the press. We cannot prevent somebody from making a movie about how god-awful Hillary Clinton is. Right? Even if it might impact the outcome of an election. Alright? So this brings us to really the one that's sort of the most complex or the most nuanced. That's freedom of speech. Okay? We'll start here with political speech because political speech has been predominantly, right, the most upheld individual freedom of speech that's allowed. You're allowed to say whatever you want about candidates. I could go around cursing a blue streak about every candidate in the United States because they're all god-awful, right? And I hate all politicians. And there's nothing that they can do to stop that. Okay? I can make pretty much any comment about any of them that I wish. All right? There's very, very, very limited opportunities for them to prevent my dissemination of my opinion. All right? So I want you to understand that. You still got 4 minutes. Okay? All right? We had an old doctrine, and I actually hate this doctrine. In fact, this is one of those instances in which Joe Biden is just an idiot. Because Joe Biden, and this is how you know Joe Biden old as dirt. Because Joe Biden be running around all the time right now talking about the precedents from a Supreme Court case in 1925, right? He tells you all the time, he's like, you don't have freedom of speech because you can't run into a crowded movie house and yell fire. That is true. You cannot do that, right? That comes from a concept called a clear and present danger doctrine that came out of a Supreme Court case called Schenck versus the United States in 1925. That ideology, that way of thinking within the Supreme Court has actually been overturned in a 1969 Supreme Court case called Brandenburg versus Ohio, right, which actually changed the standard from clear and present danger to imminent lawless action. Okay, because I'm going to be honest with you right now, there's a whole bunch of people that are running around the United States speaking in a manner that is a clear and present danger. Right? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does it regularly. She thinks communism is a legitimate form of government. That is a clear and present danger to the United States. Make no mistake about it. Is she allowed to do that? Yes. She is. So would you be. Right? It's not just because she's an elected politician. You also could run around and tell everybody that you ran into until you were blue in the face that communism is awesome, and the only reason that it's never worked in like the 17 different instances in which it's been tried is because that wasn't real communism. Yeah, I don't have like. Again, this is just continuation of Supreme Court cases that we moved on. All right, so that moves us into like, or away from sort of symbolic speech. Into more like expressive speech or conductive speech, right? Like speech that actually creates conduct. And again, there's some limitations here, and this is wildly complex because can I tell you I'm going to kill you? Like, if y'all don't do your homework tonight, man, I'm going to kill you. Can I say that? Yes. Do you legitimately believe I would actually murder you? Or am I speaking in a figure of speech? Hopefully. Hopefully. You think it's a figure of speech? I have never murdered anyone. I've never murdered any student. No. I've never murdered a student of mine. I mean, technically everybody's a student of life. I'm kidding. I've never murdered anybody. Okay? Never committed murder. Right? Joking. Okay? But you understand that there's a concept that makes this significantly difficult. And here's the thing. Come Thursday, right, because you're going to do a reading over free speech tomorrow, this is the conversation I need to have on Thursday. Okay? Right? Because can I threaten your life? No. I absolutely cannot. Okay? If I were to walk up behind Kevin right now and like whispered in his ear, because you all know I have access to all of your addresses in Skyward, yes? Because you're like if I whispered in his ear his address and was like, "Come into your house tonight. I'm gonna kill you. You have been so poorly behaved in my class." To where nobody else heard. Would you actually fear for your life? I mean, let's be honest, man. I'm a Marine, former Marine. I might be mildly unstable, right? Like, might have some mental issues. You never know. Okay? I'm going to be honest with you. If any of you came up behind me and whispered in my ear my own address and that you was going to come to my house tonight, I would be terrified. I would be. And I was trained for things like that. Okay? That's not permissible. Okay? There is going to come a time where speech is going to get limited, because if my free speech begins to infringe upon your safety, right, that's no longer permissible. Okay? Now, that gets really complex because, again, at what point in time do we draw a line as to what is or is not a direct threat, what is or is not fighting words that should or should not be permissible? Right? Can I make disparaging comments about all people that are under 5'6" because I don't like short people? Right? Can I make a comment that I say that all short people shouldn't be allowed to, like, reproduce because that's for the detriment of America?
Yes.
Yes. Right? I can. Okay? So there's a point in time where that statement, though, is no longer going to be permissible, provided it requires it can incite eminent lawless action, and that's sort of the standard that we're going to use. So to put this in perspective, like you obviously heard long enough now, I don't have a lot of faith in any politicians, yes? Yeah. I generally dislike all politicians, right? Some I dislike more than others. Okay? If I told you in teaching you this class that you had a moral obligation, right, that you needed to rise up and overthrow the United States government, right, violently, because that's the only way you can do it, right? Could I tell you that in this class? Would it be reasonable to assume that that was actually an expectation for the class in order for you to get an A? I would actually agree with that, Rodney. I think it is. Right? If I spent all day, every day, telling you how terrible the United States government was and how terrible politicians were and how they all needed to be like taken out back and shot, right? If you honestly believe that somehow, like, doing that would get you a better grade in my class, right? Because you're actively participating in government now, it's no longer permissible for me to say that. Do you understand that? Okay? And I want you to understand there are certain instances in which, like, even non-imminent lawless action is still not going to be permissible, right? Like, you cannot get on social media right now and be like, I want to kill Joe Biden, right? But you can't do that. The Secret Service will show up to your house and ask you a whole bunch of questions. Okay? Where did the mask go? All right. Again, I'm gonna let you actually go through a lot of these cases. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not going to test you on a whole bunch of the cases that show up in this PowerPoint. Okay? Only because there's a small number of cases that I actually care about, and those are the ones that you will hear me mention over and over and over again, i.e. Brandenburg versus Ohio. All right? This is going to bring us to the idea of censorship. Can the U.S. government or can speech be censored? Right? And then, as speech is being censored, we also have to understand that there's other stipulations or regulations that go into the censoring of speech. Right? So, for instance, can I go stand outside of like the local HEB with a sign that says, I don't know, God's not real and Christians should burn in hell? Why can't I say that outside of HEB? I'm allowed to be argumentative with people. That's not threatening people's lives. No. I said they should. I said that God's not real and they should burn in hell. Which, by the way, would be a terrible contradiction. That's a logical fallacy. You cannot not believe in heaven and hell, right? Like you can't say that Christianity is wrong, but then also expect Christians to go to Christian hell. That obviously, like, but I'm trying to use examples here that are a little ridiculous. Yes? Okay. So let's start with censorship in terms of student speech, right? Because that's actually going to be one of the highest thresholds here of speech. Do you have free speech in this school? No. No, not really. Right? And here's what I mean when I say this, right? So, if you saw me at HEB, right? Let's just say we were walking down the aisle at each other at HEB, and you didn't do well on my last test, and so you're mad at me, and you just walk by and you're like, fuck, Baker. Right? Can you do that at HEB? Yes. Yes. Can you do that in this room right now? No. Right? Because again, we're talking about without repercussions, yes? We understand that. Okay? Because again, we're not talking about free will here. This is not like a philosophy class where we're wondering if like humanity has free will. Okay? You can do whatever you want. We're talking about repercussion free. Okay? I cannot do anything to you if you cuss me out at HEB. I can't. It's free speech. Okay? But there are limitations here, right? And one of the easiest ways for me to explain this to you is the limitation in school is a little bit higher. The threshold, right, or the allowance for limitations here is a little bit higher. Because if you were to start cursing me out, right, what does that do to everybody else in this room? If Luke started cussing me out right now, what do I have to do? I have to stop and deal with Luke, right? Right? Because he's now creating a disruption to the classroom. Right? What does that do to the rest of you? It prevents you from learning. Right? So his free speech has now negatively impacted you. That is what we call a disruption to the learning environment. Like, I would hope y'all are not the kids that are in a principal's office regularly, but like that's the number one thing they throw in your face anytime you get in trouble. You are a disruption to the learning environment. Right? And they can legally back that up. Right? Morris versus Frederick is actually a really great case. It's a lot of fun. It's up here somewhere. Where's Bong Hits for Jesus? Anybody see it? Right there. Bong Hits for Jesus. Can you go to the football game Friday night with a big banner that says Bong Hits for Jesus? I don't think Jesus would really have a problem with that. I mean, I don't know. I've never met the guy. Right? Can you do that?
Yeah. Right now, I'm just going to school game.
Exactly, right? It's just, you're still part of the school function, school event, right? No, they can absolutely prevent that, right? Another actually really good case here is Tinker versus Des Moines, right? Which is very similar. You had kids during the Vietnam War era that wanted to wear black armbands, right? In order to protest the Vietnam War. Could they do that? Yes. That cannot be stopped. What's the difference? It's not a distraction. Right? Me simply wearing a black armband is not a distraction. You cannot deem that to be a distraction. Right? There's no way that could be reasonably understood as a distraction. Alright? Symbolic speech is also important for you to understand. The reality is, when it comes to our liberties, a whole bunch of things can really be taken as speech or a variety of speech, right? So we understand. If I'm driving down, let's say I'm going home today, right? And I haven't been in Fulshire for very long, but I do know that the cops up here are a little ridiculous. And I've heard rumors that they will pull people over for like going 42 and a 40. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so if I don't like the police officers for that, and I'm driving home and I pass a cop, can I flip them off?
Yes.
Penalty free?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yep.
Yes, I can. Okay, that is symbolic speech. Okay, it is deemed to be symbolic speech, and it is free speech. Now listen to me, I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you. Do not do that on your way home today, and then be like, Baker told me I could. That is true. I could, but like, police can also pull you over because, just so you understand, here's some of the ridiculousnesses that I got pulled over for when I was your age. I once got pulled over for running a yellow light. That was the actual cause of me being pulled over, according to the officer. I once got pulled over on suspicion of driving a stolen vehicle. And I'm white. Okay? Right? I got pulled over for, not signaling while changing lanes. I mean, technically that's illegal, but like, how many of y'all do that? Like, that's a little ridiculous. So, I'm just saying, like, they can find any one of a number of reasons to pull you over, and like, they will. Right? And then, eventually we'll have a whole lesson on, like, police interactions. But I mean, at that point, you're going to roll down the window, and they're going to be angry at you, and then they're going to magically smell marijuana in your car, and your life's going to get significantly worse. Right? Alright? The Westboro Baptist Church is actually, do anybody know who the Westboro Baptist Church is? Good. They're crazy people from, I believe, Kansas, right? Who think that when a soldier dies in war, it's because Jesus hates gays. Yeah. Like, signs in the background. Like I will say, because I'm always up for some really good trolling, right? I love people that troll other people like well. Somebody did buy the house across from the Westboro Baptist Church and painted it rainbow. I'm just saying, like, that's kind of awesome. All right. Okay. This should have been with the other one. I put things out of order. I apologize. Okay, so back to press, because I do need you to also understand that there's some sub-variations in terms of press. There's print and then there's spoken, because then there's libel and there is slander. Libel is written, slander is spoken. You cannot engage in libel and or slander. Those are not permissible forms of free speech. Okay? I cannot, for instance, I don't know, who's going to A&M here? Who's in the call?
It was only y'all guys.
Okay, right, so if Anthony, I love calling him Cole, sorry. Right, if Anthony's an A&M guy, are you top, what is this, top 7%? 10. Is it 10 to get into A&M? I thought it went down. Okay, whatever. Let's just, I don't know what your rank is. We're just going to pretend for a second you're like 10.2. So you're just outside of that. You don't get guaranteed admission, right? If I were to write A&M and like, write A&M a letter and was like, Anthony has cheated on every test in my class, he's a terrible student, like, can I do that?
No.
Penalty free?
No.
Can he sue me for that?
Yes.
Would he win? Anthony, you cheated on the test? No. Right? Honestly, even if you had, I'm not saying you have, I don't think you have. Do I have any evidence that you had? No. It doesn't even matter if I'm telling the truth. If I can't prove that I'm telling the truth, it don't matter. You understand that? Okay? So there's a lot of limitations in that regard on things that you can and cannot do. Right? The government will also, there's a concept you need to know called prior restraint, in which the government can prevent the publication of information beforehand. Right? Meaning, rather than like penalizing somebody after they said it, they can actually prevent you from saying it in the first place. There is a fairly strict scrutiny to that. The U.S. government has to prove that it's like a matter of national security, right? Sometimes that's easy to prove. Sometimes that's a little bit more complex. Was it Sullivan versus the New York Times? No, New York Times versus U.S. That's the Pentagon Papers. That's a good example of that. I just went over libel and slander. All right, now we're going to get into the fun stuff, right? Obscenity. What is obscenity? Well, what does obscene mean? Because here's the problem, and I need you to understand this. If the court is going to tell us what we can and cannot do, right, the court has to be able to define it for us. Because otherwise, how would we know? Yes? Is the F word obscene? Shit, do we know what the F word is? Oh, can I say that?
Yeah.
Is it obscene?
No.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to define obscene. Okay? As a general rule, obscene is going to be deemed to be anything sort of overtly sexual in nature. Right? In which case, like, shit, damn, those are not. Right? Even the F word, theoretically, while it could be utilized in a sexual manner, is not always utilized that way. Right? Okay. In which case, there's going to be times where you really couldn't deem the F word to be obscene, right? Again, if I just ran around HEB, ran around outside of HEB. No, let's just run around a public park, because theoretically HEB could still like trespass me even from their parking lot, right? If I ran around a public park, blaring the what was it, 1990 like 3 song, The Police. Right? Can I do that? Probably. All right. Now, noise ordinance consequences and how loud, that's a whole different standard. But yeah, I could do that, right? Interestingly enough, then that also gets into some complex issues over things of a sexual nature like pornography, right? Because at what point is pornography no longer protected free speech? Okay, do we all know what the Statue of David is? No, we don't know what the Statue of David is? Right, it's like Michelangelo's carved statue of like the perfect male specimen. Is Michelangelo Da Vinci? I don't know. I'm not an art history guy. Somebody carved a stone dude. Naked. No fig leaf, no nothing. Okay? Is that pornographic? No, it's art. That's art, man. That's art. We're good. That's art. That's art. Right? Anybody in here taking like anatomy? As a class? You have a textbook? You didn't have a book? Okay. You have an anatomy textbook? Do you think there's any like obscene photos in your anatomy textbook? There probably are, right? Are those like pornographic and illegal? No, they would be deemed scientific and have like actual medical purpose, like you're learning, right? Okay. So with that, and did I lose it? I don't. Okay. So I don't have it. This is what I want you to understand though. And so you actually need to like write this down and pay attention for a minute. There's basically a four-pronged, there's four issues, right? So if we're going to determine if something is pornographic or not, right? One, does it have artistic value? Right? If it has artistic value, it is not deemed to be pornography, and it's going to be permissible under free speech, i.e. the Statue of David. Okay? Does it have, like, intellectual value? Right? Meaning a picture, like an anatomy photo in a textbook of an anatomy class. Right? Like, obviously, if anybody in here wants to be a doctor, you understand you're going to see body parts uncovered as a part of medical training, right? Not pornographic in nature. Okay? Does it have literary value, right? Okay? Because believe it or not, there was actually a case law over this. There is a book called Lolita, which if you were ever assigned in college, I feel bad for you. It is disturbing. Right? I personally would argue that it is pornographic, right? I don't think that it has literary value, but it's deemed to have literary value, and therefore it is generally deemed to be acceptable. Okay? And then the last, interestingly enough, is there political value to it? Right? Okay? In which case, is there some sort of political purpose behind whatever that is? Right? Which there's actually a case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court called the People versus Larry Flynt. If you don't know who Larry Flynt is, he created a magazine called Hustler, which is a pornographic magazine. They used to do like a lot of political cartoons in there. Somebody sued him, and the court was like, no, that has political value. Like, you are a public figure. No one in their right mind would actually believe that what the cartoon says is real. Right? Therefore, it's permissible. All right? This brings us to the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Okay? We will talk about this in more detail in a couple of weeks. Here's what I need you to understand. First of all, Second Amendment says you have a right to bear arms. Right? You are free to have a weapon. Okay? Again, like all of our freedoms, we understand that this is not absolute, and you can lose your freedom. Yes? Okay? If you are a convicted felon, you can have your right to bear arms taken from you. By the way, what does arms mean? Weapons is actually a better definition than guns, right? Because we know about the nuclear arms race. We learned about that in U.S. history, right?
Yeah.
Nuclear arms. I get to bear arms. I can own a nuke, right?
No.
Why not? Okay? So understand, again, there are limitations put on everything. I know of no one who honestly believes that you have a right to a nuclear weapon. right? Do I have the right to own a tank?
Yes.
With some restrictions,
I
yes.
of a guy one time.
Right? What about a fully automatic machine gun?
Yeah.
Right? So there's some issues there. We have a couple of Supreme Court cases. Ultimately, McDonald versus Chicago is the one that incorporates the Second Amendment to states. Okay? So in that case, you had somebody, they didn't outlaw guns, right? They didn't outlaw handguns in Chicago, but they said in order to legally have a handgun in Chicago, that handgun needed to be registered, and you can't register new handguns. Right? That right there should show you the logic of American government, yes? I'm not going to outlaw handguns, but in order to have it legally, you have to register it, and I'm going to outlaw registering it. Right? And the Supreme Court overturned that and said you can't do that. Alright? Due process. We'll actually cover this again in more detail when we get into civil rights. Okay? But due process is basically just the concept of what it takes to get rid of your liberties. Right? Because this is actually a really fascinating question, right? We understand that a felon does not have the right to own a gun, yes? Okay? If you're on the no-fly list, you know it's a real list?
Yeah.
The U.S. government keeps a real list of people that are not allowed to get on an airplane. Right? Hey, if you're on the no-fly list, can you be denied your right to own a gun? There are some people that are trying to take that right away from you. Right? What does it take to get on the no-fly list?
Endangering the life of someone on a plane, probably.
What's the,
Oh, it's way lower than that.
Being annoying.
Actually, being annoying can get you on the no-fly list.
Wasn't that one lady who was...
At one point in time, and I think they took the poor kid off the no-fly list. At one point in time, a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old was on the no-fly list.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm going to be honest with you, if you've ever flown with a 5-year-old,
I mean,
maybe they should be on the no-fly list, okay? But there's no due process involved in that concept. There's nothing that has occurred legally, right? There's actually no way even to defend yourself. There are a number of instances in which people have been put on the no-fly list with no knowledge that they've been put on the no-fly list. They just show up to get on an airplane and they're like, sorry dude, you can't fly. Okay? Alright? So due process comes out of the 14th Amendment, and it is literally the procedures. It is the process, that's why we call it due process. It is the process that you are owed before your liberties or your freedoms can be taken from you. Okay? Fourth Amendment is the implied right to privacy. Okay? I do want to make sure that you understand this. You have a right to privacy. That is a liberty or a freedom that you have. Okay? I always enjoyed teaching about the Fourth Amendment because there was a kid that used to, well, he went to the high school I used to teach at in North Carolina, right? And this kid then became a basketball player for the University of North Carolina. Dude liked to smoke a lot of pot. Eventually, got kicked off the basketball team, right? The basketball coach felt bad for him. And so he let him live in a house that he had there in Chapel Hill while he was finishing his college degree. Okay, cops showed up one day because there was a broken window in the house. They knock on the front door and they're like, hey, can we, check and make sure everything's okay? And Will, like an idiot, let the cops in. Okay? Because at that point, when the officer walks into the room and sees a bong sitting on the coffee table, Will's under arrest. Okay? And that will hold up in a court of law because it's like fair discovery, right? If he opened up like a pencil box that contained your little tiny pipe, no, because obviously that wouldn't make sense for him to open that up if he was searching for an intruder in your home. No human being is in there. Got it? Okay. Now the Fourth Amendment has gotten increasingly complex over time. Because the Fourth Amendment protects you from illegal searches and seizures. What is a search? When they look around. Okay? And it's not just when they look around, it's a whole bunch of other factors. Okay? Can, for instance, right, can the police search my cell phone data to see where my cell phone pings from?
No.
Without a warrant. Well, obviously, with a warrant, they can do pretty much anything.
Unless you allow them.
Well, I can't allow them. I don't have access to that.
Oh, so they can.
Verizon has access to that. Right? Verizon is the one who provides my cell service, so it is Verizon who has the data of what towers my phone is pinging off of at what time, therefore providing a general location for my person, yes? So can the United States police, or can the police, the government, right, can they go to Verizon and get that information to figure out where I was at all times?
Yes.
That's not an invasion of my privacy and an illegal search?
I think so there was a lot of
Hmm?
concern.
Well, there's an implied right to privacy. I need you to understand that. Okay? It's not an expressly stated right to privacy, but you have an implied right to privacy. If a police officer pulls you over on the way home today and says, I want to search your car, you can be like, no, I'm good, man. Nope, you're not searching my car. Okay? You have a right to privacy. You don't have to allow for that. Okay? Now, there are exceptions, there are limitations to it, right? And we can talk until we're blue in the face about all of the different limitations and exceptions to everything, and we probably will do that, because I'm sure as we get, well, I don't know, y'all don't ask no questions, man. Y'all are so quiet, y'all are quiet as a church mouse, right? But usually when I get to this point in the class, like on one or two of our discussion days, because we'll have a number throughout this unit, kids sit there and ask me, well, what happens in this situation? What if this? What if that? Okay? I mean, if you want to, we'll have an opportunity to go through all that stuff, right? But there's a whole bunch of nuances to all sorts of things, right? Just so you understand, can the police randomly stop you on like this, like you're walking down the road, can the police stop you and frisk you? Frisk. Pat, like,
Yeah.
Oh.
no, okay, you don't have a weapon on you. Can the police do that? So here's the thing. This is where it gets really ridiculous, okay? Because sometimes the court has actually upheld that that's a permissible thing to do, okay? In fact, New York City used to have a policy, right? It was an actual policy called stop and frisk, right? So like if Rodney was in Manhattan and walking down the street, the cops would just stop him and be like, hey, how you doing? Stop. We're going to frisk you. For no reason. None whatsoever, right? That went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said you can't do that. But not because it was illegal. The Supreme Court said you can't do that because the manner in which you are doing it is discriminatory. Okay? Which means that if Rodney and I were both walking down the street in New York City, only one of the two of us is getting frisked. You understand? The cops are only stopping one of the two of us. I'm in my 40s. It's not going to be me. Right? I'm also white. No, I mean, but here's the thing. They found that the cops were basically only stopping like 15 to 30-year-old black and Hispanic men. Right? At that point, the policy is discriminatory. But the Supreme Court basically said, look, man, if you just stop everybody and frisk them, that's okay. Okay? Which, I don't know that I'm all right with that. But, okay? But that is the concept of stop and frisk. Okay? There's all sorts of other exceptions as it pertains to the Fourth Amendment, right? Like, you understand that if the police come to your house with a search warrant to search your house for like a knife because they think you murdered somebody with a knife, okay? First of all, if that ever happens, ask for a copy of the search warrant. You understand? Okay? Take it from them. Do not give it back. Alright? If you have a shed outside in your backyard, can they search the shed too?
No.
So this is where it gets kind of interesting. Can they search the shed with the warrant for your house? The answer is no. Okay, but if they were unaware that the shed existed, like let's just say they were going off of satellite footage, right, looking at your property, and the satellite image shows no shed because you put the shed up 3 months ago. Okay, because the shed is there, any judge, if they gave them a warrant to search the house, the judge would include in the warrant searching the shed. At that point, they can search the shed even without the warrant. Okay, now you could try to stop them from doing that, and if you really, really fought them over it, they might just put a cop right next to the shed, and then send another cop to go get a second warrant. And then they're just gonna prevent you access to the shed until they come and search it so that you couldn't remove the murder weapon if that's where you had it. Right? Fifth Amendment protections. The Fifth Amendment is actually a lot like the First Amendment in the sense that there's a whole bunch of different aspects to the Fifth Amendment, right? So, in the Fifth Amendment, you have a right to a trial by grand jury. This is actually really interesting because in the Sixth Amendment, you have a right to a speedy trial, yes? Do not, this is the only, you will never ever hear me, you will never hear me tell you, give up your rights, except that one. Give that one up. Give it up. You don't want a speedy trial, ever. Because you have a right to a trial by grand jury. You know what that means? No, a grand jury is a jury in which the prosecution goes and they make their whole case. Right? And so they're like, we think Baker murdered this person and here's all the evidence. And then the jury hears all the evidence, and if more than half of them go, Baker might have done it, right? Then they come arrest me, right? And now we're going to go to a real trial.
You get indicted by a grand jury.
Well, yeah, that's the indictment, right? And so here's the thing. That means that the prosecution has already done all of their research, made their whole case, and presented it once. They're ready to go, okay? Presuming I am innocent and I was unaware that I was under investigation, I am not ready to defend myself in a court of law. I don't want a speedy trial for that reason. Okay? You have protections against double jeopardy, which is getting wildly complex in this day and age, because you can actually be tried under federal law and state law, and that's not a double jeopardy violation. You do not have to self-incriminate. I need you to understand that it's only for self. You can be required or compelled to testify against your friend. The only person you cannot be compelled to testify against is your spouse. A spousal privilege is a part of that concept. Alright, Sixth Amendment, you have a right to an attorney. Hopefully you know that from the Miranda rights, that's like right to silence, yada yada yada. Eighth Amendment protects you against excessive bails, excessive fines, cruel and unusual punishment. That, I'm going to tell you right now, is a little complex, because one, it says cruel and unusual, not cruel or unusual, right? Meaning, theoretically, if the punishment is not cruel and unusual, it would be deemed permissible, okay? This is actually one of the arguments in favor of the death penalty. Anybody in here want to tell me the death penalty is not cruel? I would agree. I think the death penalty is cruel. You're killing another human being. Is it unusual? No. Over the course of history, death was the penalty for all sorts of things, right? You go back to the Old West, if you stole somebody's horse, you got hung, right? Like, thievery was penalized with death in the Old West, okay? So death was the penalty for all sorts of things. It was not unusual, all right? We already really talked about right to privacy. Eminent, good God, I'm going all over the place. I've got to reorganize this. That goes, eminent domain goes back to the Fifth Amendment and whether or not the government can take stuff for you. Roe, Griswold, all that stuff, that goes back to the implied right to privacy, right? And whether or not you can engage in private matters on your own. That's the end of the PowerPoint. We're good. We finished it. Yay! No, you have a quiz tonight now.